On the question of facts, you said in your written evidence to this committee very clearly that in respect of the information that you have got from Mr. Snowden, you've only published 1% of the information that you were given. Is that still correct?
It's approximately correct. So we continue to publish stuff, but it's about 1% of what we were given.
As far as I can see, you've had 58,000 files, so you're telling this committee that only 1% of the information in those files has now gone public?
Yes.
Where are the other files?
Well, as I would have explained, this is an ongoing story that we're writing. If you think it's sensible that I talk here about where the exact files are, I'm happy to write to you, but I'm not sure that that is a really sensible thing to do about the existence of other files in different bits of the world.
But there are other files under your control in different parts of the world?
There is one file which we hold jointly with the New York Times, which is obviously in New York.
Yes. And the other files are under proper... because this is important in respect of the inquiry. Obviously the context is important, but there is criticism that some of these files may not be under your control. They're all under your control one way or the other.
One of them, as I would have explained, I think it would be helpful if I could give some context, because it's important to understand there were 4 different sets of information that went to 4 different parties in 4 different countries in 3 different continents. I think it's important to establish that to begin with.
Sure.
One of them was The Guardian. One of them was The Washington Post, clearly not under my control. One went to Rio and one went to Germany. That's the hand of cards, if you like. We were all dealt.
Sure.
The Guardian, the security services, governments. And so I can't obviously say that the Washington Post files are under my control, because
we are in touch with the New York Times, and we may take evidence from the New York Times in the future, written or oral. But in terms of the files under your control, 99% of which has not been published, you have full control. You know where they are secure and in a place where you feel they can't get into other people's hands.
I believe that to be true.
Now, you also said in reply to our parliamentary colleague Julian Smith in a letter that I think that was published, that there are 850,000 people in the world who have the same information as you have in those files.
We were told that 850,000 people, because this goes to the original leak, which is obviously the thing that people are most concerned about, that 850,000 people had access to the information that a 29-year-old in Hawaii, who wasn't even employed by the American government, had access to.
So these 850,000 people, this was a figure given to you of people who've got security clearance, or they would know what was in the files that you had?
I mean, obviously people were aghast. I think people at GCHQ were aghast that a 29-year-old in Hawaii, not even employed by the American government, could get access to their files. And I was told the figure of 850,000 people who had that kind of access.
So is part of the defence, because obviously there is a lot of controversy regarding your publication of this information, that you may have this information, so do 850,000 other people, and they are also in the same position, if they choose to be, as Mr. Snowden was, to release this information. So there's safety in numbers, in other words.
I think the point is that twice in the last 3 years, these giant databases that were created after 9/11 have proved porous. These secret things have escaped, and that is because so many people have access to them. That is the only point that I think we were trying to make. And when people talk about they use the word catastrophe, or the fact that there's been this catastrophic loss. People have compared it with McLean, Burgess, Philby, all kinds of things. That was down to the original leak, and that was because, as I say, this 29-year-old, who was one of hundreds of thousands of people, had access to information, and I'm sure that's something that everyone must now be considering what to do about.
Now, in respect of what was said to our sister committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee, you were severely criticised, perhaps not personally, but certainly your newspaper was, and the decision that you took, by the heads of the security services, and this is your opportunity to answer them. Mr. Andrew Parker described what you and your newspaper did as a gift that our enemies needed to evade us and to strike us at will. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase before. John Sawyers, the head of MI6, said that our adversaries were rubbing their hands with glee. Now, all heads of the security services were very clear in their evidence to the Intelligence and Security Committee that you had damaged this country as a result of what you had done. Clearly, other editors took the decision as well. We know it's been in the New York Times and in the Washington Post and El País and Le Monde and other newspapers. But they're not before us today. Do you recognise what you have done? Do you accept that this has damaged the country? Because this is severe criticism that I haven't seen before from the head of our security services.
Well, I think it is important context that editors of probably the world's leading newspapers in America, the Washington Post and the New York Times, took virtually identical decisions. So this is not a rogue newspaper. It is serious newspapers who've had long experience of dealing with national security. The problem with these accusations is that they tend to be very vague, and they're not rooted in specific stories. You've quoted two. I would like to quote four people back at you who have told me personally there has been no damage. Or who have seen. So you took evidence, I think, last week from Norman Baker, the current
Indeed.
Home Office.
Yes.
I won't repeat that evidence, but he said he had seen no damage.
Yes, that's right.
My second person we have consulted, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, so somebody who is sitting in oversight of all the intelligence, has seen it all, said to us, he asked not to be named, but we asked him, because we want to know this, have you seen anything The Guardian has published that has caused damage? And he said, I've been incredibly impressed by what you've done, how you've done it. You've written about the scope and scale. I have seen nothing that you have done that's caused damage. A senior administration official of the current Obama administration told us last week, we asked the same question, damage. He said, I've been incredibly impressed by the judgment and care that you would expect from a great news organization. And finally, a senior Whitehall official at the heart of these stories, September the 9th, I have not seen anything you have published to date which has risked lives. So there are different views about this, and I listen with respect to the views that you've given, but I don't...
But you disagree with them?
Well, it's not that I disagree, it's impossible to assess because
sure.
No one has given me specific evidence.
The real criticism is that the information that you have contains the names of individual security officers. And this has been sent round the world, sometimes paid for by The Guardian. And these names are of our security officers, people who are there to protect our country. And that's how you've damaged the country. Because others who don't have security clearance have been able to read these names, know who they are, possibly know where they live. That is the damage that they allege you have done.
Well, first of all, we have never used a single name. And that, I think, is the crucial bit. We've published no names and we've lost control of no names. It's never been a secret that these documents contain names. A lot of them are PowerPoint presentations given by named individuals. From the beginning of June, when we published the first presentation, we redacted the name of somebody. It was apparent that these documents had names. And when the material was seized off David Miranda, under the terror laws, it's apparent from the witness statements that the government knew then, although I would say they knew already, and in fact we discussed the use of names with the Cabinet Secretary when he visited us in mid-June. So there's been 6 months when it's been apparent that there have been names in these documents. I told the Cabinet Secretary personally that we were sharing this material with the New York Times. On July the 22nd, I gave him the editor of the New York Times phone number, email address, and Steve Engelberg from ProPublica.
Sure.
Not once in 6 months.
So you can guarantee, and I find it difficult for you to guarantee, but you're telling this committee that you can guarantee the security of all these names of these officers?
Well, your original question was the copy that the New York Times has. Do I believe that is being held securely? Yes.
Well, all the copies. I mean, anything under your control. You have these names. Can you guarantee that these names will not leak out?
I can talk about the copies under the joint control of The Guardian and the New York Times. And I can say that that has been held securely.
Right. Now, both the criticism...
Incidentally, Chairman, I just want to add that in that 6 months, it would have been open to anybody from Her Majesty's government to come and ask about the names, and that hasn't happened.
And has anyone asked you to destroy this information or hand it over?
Well, it is a matter of public record that the Cabinet Secretary came and asked me to destroy the entire cache of documents. So, yes.
Right, but you haven't done so?
No, that is also a matter of public record. I told them.
Let me ask you this finally before I go to other members of this committee. Some of the criticisms against you in The Guardian have been very, very personal. You and I were both born outside this country, but I love this country. Do you love this country?
How do you answer that kind of question?
We live in a democracy. Most of the people working on this story are British people who have families in this country who love this country. I'm slightly surprised to be asked the question, but yes, we are patriots, and one of the things we are patriotic about is the nature of the democracy and the nature of a free press and the fact that one can in this country discuss and report these things.
So the reason why you've done this has not been to damage the country, it is to help the country understand what is going on as far as surveillance is concerned.
I think there are countries, and they're not generally democracies, where the press are not free to write about these things, and where the security services do tell editors what to write, and where politicians do censor newspapers. That's not the country that we live in Britain. It's not the country that America is, and it's one of the things I love about this country, is that we have that freedom to write and to report and to think, and we have some privacy, and those are the concerns that need to be balanced against national security, which no one is underestimating. And I can speak for the entire Guardian staff who have families who live in this country that they want to be secure too.
Thank you very much.